of public transit and whatnot, inevitably, unfortunately, some good people are not going to continue, if you will, on the board. And so then you kind of start the process all over again. We're not going to change how it is right now, but it's understandable at times how difficult it is to get these understandings and discussions and whatnot, where a human becomes more knowledgeable in an area where prior we haven't had any experience. So perhaps, maybe someday, certainly not in my lifetime, the system of electing people to be on a board such as this would be a more permanent and not so much on other positions that a person is elected to. Anyhow, that's all.
I agree with you, Lance.
Yeah.
All right, I'll continue if you'd like me to.
Please do.
Yeah.
We're running out of time here.
Page 2.1 and 2.2 is really my favorite pages of this budget because it summarizes everything and really keeps it in that format, that philosophy that I was talking about before. We have the beginning reserves, our inflows and outflows of operating, inflows and outflows for capital, and then your ending reserves. So it gives you a good overall picture of what's going on for 3 years.
So the table actually continues. It's continuous on those 2 pages.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's really 2 pages.
So some of the summaries come at the top of page 2 that are summaries of the preceding page.
And when you look at, for example, capital revenues and expenditures, I know we talked a little bit about that earlier. If you look at a transfer from bus reserve, 282,380, and if you were to compare that to a later schedule, which we'll look at in a second, which is on 3.1, that amount, the 282,380, is really the summation of 4 capital grants. Island Transit Match is 88,000, 106,000, 79,380, and 9,000, the very last line. So in a sense, it does show you the match amount, but it's summarized. And as well, you see the transfer from van reserve 16.5. Let's see if you look at page 3.1, 12 van pool vans, Island Transit Match 16.5. So the hope is that you put that money away before you spend it and you pull it out of the reserve. But that won't always be the case, especially if you haven't put it away in advance. So, for example, security cameras, shelters, Parker Road bike rack, those items would come out of the current budget, you might say, or the surplus monies that are available to pay for it. So that's what happens there. And you can see in each section, the grayed area, well, I think maybe yours is black and white, but under each section of either operating or revenue, you can see the net surplus or deficit, and then at the bottom, the net, you might say, which is everything combined. And then those effects will carry over into your reserves. The next page, 3.1, breaks up our contracts that we have with the state of Washington and our capital grants. Many are federal grants, but they come through the state of Washington. And it shows the amounts that we were awarded, the amounts that we used, and the matches, the amounts that the grantor is going to pay, and then our match percentage, and how that sorts out in terms of dollars. So that's a big source of our revenue, and it's detailed here, but summarized on pages 2.1 and 2.2. And then the remainder of this budget is really each department separately stated, 3 years of data, and then the changes in actuals, or the changes in dollars, the changes in terms of percentage. One of the differences between this budget and last is I added a department called capital, which again separates in actual and budget terms the monies that we're going to be spending for
13.1?
page 13.1.
I have a question real quick.
Yes.
On the 12 ample vans for the VIP,
Page 3.1.
yeah, for 3.1, I knew we applied for that. Did we win that? Did we? Because that was,
We did.
we did get that, okay, because I hadn't gotten that information. I knew.
It was very recent, very recent.
Yeah, I knew it was like we were stretching it trying to get it, so that's a good thing, and that's only a 5% match.
We just had it confirmed last week.
Oh, okay, because I knew it was, we were like low on the totem pole, for lack of better words, to get that money, so that's a good thing.
And we received 627,000, half of which we plan to take advantage of this year. So we were hoping to purchase the remainder next year.
That's good. See, that's one of those things that would, it looked like it wouldn't be worth even asking for because we were low on priority.
Yeah, those are
and-
competitive.
Yeah, very competitive, and we got it, so it's, and like I say, a 5% match, that's a good investment there.
And that's a 2-year grant.
2-year.
Total
We plan to purchase it over 2 years.
627,000.
No, we'll spend 330 this year, and then we can spend 300 the next year. If we need the vans, or to replace the Opus vans.
And then, like I was saying before, is page 13.1 was an attempt to align our system, our FleetNet system, to the budget process, and it's by separating out capital and operating. And so when we get our data and when we spend our money, it should flow through our system in the same way, so that we can look at it more closely. And it gives details to what it is we're purchasing and what grant number, and in some cases what organization is coming through, like the STPR.
It's even more detail on 13.2. Each item is explained, right?
That's right, even more detail.
The very last page.
So I think we did a good job on the capital side of the expenses, but I'm still interested in kind of the supplemental budget that details exactly where we're spending new money. So those requests that came from department heads to either add staff or hours.
Yeah, we can do that
Or
now.
put, yeah, I'd like to see that.
Okay.
And then where the harbor station is, does transit own that land that it's on, or do they lease it from the city?
I think we own it.
We own it.
I think we own it.
Robin, do you recall the history on that?
I don't, that was before my time, but I think we own that.
No, that would be a good thing to find out.
We do, it's federal money, and it was built in '96, and no work's been done on it since '96, which is when the cost is.
Well, I saw that the bids were on Harbor Station, that we're talking a facility that is not even 20 years old. Why are we having to rewire it?
I saw the,
I mean, my house is 22 years old and I'm not rewiring it.
So some of the conversations I recall, so one, they're upgrading to the LED lighting.
That was gonna be my next question. Why are we upgrading to LED? What's wrong with what we've got?
I'm just thinking they're thinking of cost-saving measures.
Where's the cost? I would like to see a breakdown of the cost-saving measures, savings on electrical and the savings in the cost per bulb and everything like that, because those LED light bulbs are expensive.
PSC will probably give them to you if you ask them.
Well, I'd really like to see the a cost-benefit analysis on that, because I don't see the need.
So that
And the
was,
other question I got is, why do we need phone and Wi-Fi there?
I think they have breaks, they take breaks there, the drivers.
So why do we need
We
Wi-Fi?
have camera systems up there and a security system. So for the cameras, they work on to be able to transfer the signals back. We're able to monitor them from here. And a lot of times we aid law enforcement with different requests if something happens down there.
Good answer. I just I was just wanting to make sure we weren't just providing Wi-Fi for people that were sitting there waiting for a bus.
In fact, people have been asking, even operators, you know, different things about that, and that's just not something we've put out for discussion. We've talked with Ken about it, and at this time, that's a,
We don't provide a hotspot there, do we?
no,
No.
not
Okay.
at this time, no.
All right, I mean, the bus service is adequate, they don't.
I believe there were some problems with the wiring when they first put the camera systems in. I wasn't here at that time, but I know that they've went in since and identified several problems inside the post with the wiring. So I think that could play a part on also why they're trying to upgrade that wiring down there.
And it should go without saying, or it should go without asking, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, because I haven't seen them. We've done competitive bidding on this, because that sounds like still, I mean, when you look at the facility overall, for $50,000, I could probably go in there, raise that whole thing, and build brand new.
For $50,000?
For 50
I
grand.
don't think so, not today.
To build
There's not that much there.
on the electrical side.
So we put it out.
I'm talking about the electrical side.
That whole thing, it's a couple little huts and a roof.
Anyway.
Anyway, I'm curious to see the bills. I'll just use a comparison, okay? I'm on the SRF committee, and there was a local community drain field, and it was bid at $40,000 to replace the drain field. And our health department guy went to the leader, the head of the people, and says, hey, why don't you try such and such company? Did you go out to them for a bid? And they came back and said, we'll do it for you for $8,000. So that's the way your competitive bidding comes in.
So I think what we got was a quote for the
Not
budget
even a quote,
process.
it was a rough estimate.
Rough estimate.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we would go out to
Yeah.
bids for this, yeah, no
Okay.
question. No question.
All I wanted to make sure was as you have conversations about Bay Shore changes, that we're not investing a bunch of money in something that is going to need to get adjusted in terms of, that's why I was asking who owned the property. I just want like you to look at that and make sure that we're not gonna make an improvement to something that's gonna need to be relocated 6 inches further back or whatever the issue might be.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's all. And I'm happy to paint.
Well, I think our chair, Mr. Albert, could get the same crew that they used to paint the wall in Oak Harbor and go down there and paint Harbor Station.
We actually painted Harbor Station, the interior for the operators last year, I believe, and a lot of us supervisors volunteered our time, went down there, painted the bathroom, painted inside, bought new chairs, and just fixed it up, new blinds, so it looks really good when you walk in. And I always forget that until I actually go down there to visit. But we were looking at the outside, and it's crumbling.
Well, it's also weather exposed to saltwater climate out there. It's wood siding, as I recall, and you have to maintain that.
Oh, I concur. I just question the price and the LEDs. I don't think that they're all they're cracked up to be.
I think you can get a grant from Puget Sound Energy to do the lights, probably.
Well, that would be work.
They're pretty committed to energy-saving light bulbs, and sometimes will step up and help you make the changes.
Yeah.
It's beneficial to them as well.
Don't get me wrong. I like LEDs. I've got them at home. I like the way they look.
So they're good enough for you, but not.
I don't use them as a cost-saving measure because they can sit there and say all they want that they'll last 8 years or 10 years or 12 years, and they don't.
Okay, we're gonna move on.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions, just, well, more than that, but just start with a couple, all the way through, and in the summary, notice that licenses and fees went up dramatically.
Which page are you on?
Well, just, I guess we could start with 2.1, they're way down, 50901. And then I noticed in, in the separate budgets it went up, and I just wondered what that was about, why it went up so dramatically.
So I think part of it for operations, so IT was moved over into operations, you know, when Mr. Grasser got here. They've kind of been switched around from department to department, but we've been in here a little more than 2 years, and some of the computing services that we had been using to begin with, we hadn't been billed for some of the support and some of the licensing things that are now starting to run out. And so that's the reason. And so IT has went through and identified a schedule of when all these licenses will come about. And so we're just kind of hit at this time.
It's one that isn't labeled totally clearly, but it does include a lot of software licensing.
Yeah, that's what I figured, but. And the other one I had just right there was wondering, on the other hand, why the insurance premiums went down pretty substantially from 2014. Was that just over budgeted then, or?
Our insurance is based on mileage, and it's also
okay.
dependent on what we report as mileage. So even if we're paying less in the current year, if our mileage exceeds what we've projected for WISTIP, then our premium would increase in the following year. So, but it basically is about mileage.
Okay, good.
I'm going to assume the reduction in sick leave buyout was a result of reducing the workforce. So a lot of people had to be bought out when they weren't here anymore.
Now this one is directly related to Martha Rose. There was a lot of buyout there in the 2015, which won't continue.
Oh, yeah, when her severance.
So it went down. Yeah, I had that one too.
Shows us $2,000. And when I say us, it's the taxpayers of Iron County. Just in case she ever listens.
All right, we're ready to move on here.
Well, it's a reflection of Kara's being steel.
Any other questions about the detail, or do you want to walk through it page by page? Or?
Well, I'd like to, if you're not going to go through page by page, I have quick questions on 7.1. Sick leave buyout, vacation buyout, and this is in paratransit. You don't budget money in paratransit for buyout, or is that in a different category?
I guess the answer is no, we don't do that, and partially because para and 100 are really
Interchangeable?
tightly woven together.
So the cost for that is
It's really in 100,
Okay.
or a lot of those costs. And the buyout is really just an estimate, so it's easier to just keep it in that one department.
I got it.
However, in our system, it takes those expenses and separates them based on our expense history. And so to be, for comparison's sake, we try and budget it separately, but for this particular situation, I think it's better.
It makes sense.
In the one department. Okay.
But you didn't purple it out. Should you or not?
Yeah, well, we could. Yeah, you're right.
Because I got used to calling them.
Are the operators of paratransit exclusively paratransit, or are they shared?
It's shared. So a driver, for example, could be driving a fixed route and then switch to para.
Yeah.
Right, switching somebody along the
Yeah,
way.
so it sort of has to be in one department or the other.
Yeah, but that's a good point. I should bring it up.
Paul, I
Yeah, I was gonna say, that was, if I might, when we're talking paratransit, or you have a paratransit bus, or it says paratransit on the front, that's not necessarily only for paratransit. If there's a regular customer, they're gonna ride on it, correct?
No.
Well, it's the other way around.
The paratransit buses are the smaller ones that, house maybe, 6 people. And they say paratransit, it's written, painted on there.
Yeah.
They don't have interchangeable reader boards on them, so they're strictly used for para. Unless we, if we really needed them and we didn't have the buses, we've made up some signs that if we had to in an emergency, we could put Route 12 in the window and off we go.
But let's say Route 1 or Route whatever is running, if there's a paratransit passenger, they're capable of picking them up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have it
That's why the
backwards.
sign changes or the
And-
service changes.
Okay, so then when we're looking at this budget for paratransit for next year, did you take into account that,
You gotta say.
I'm on page 7.1, did you take into account that in June, the end of June or the end of July, that the out of bounds will no longer be doing that. You know, we gave them that 1-year grandfather for those few people that we would go out of bounds for. After that, we won't be doing that any longer, so you'll be saving some
Yeah.
mileage and some
I
time.
didn't take that into account.
Okay, so with this, so the actual number when we come to the end of the year should actually be a little bit lower because that's less wage and gas and fuel, et cetera. And I think that was the end of June, wasn't it, or July?
Yeah, assuming that they're not replaced by inbound, because paratransit is growing each year.
Well, yes, it's growing, but I mean, if it's inbound, the whole thing comes down to it though, is you're not gonna have that cost of going out of bounds anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So then, if you jump over to 8.1, Paul, and under insurance premiums, there's no allocation down there, it's grayed out or purpled out. This is for general operations, so they are not allocated. That probably the same thing, that money is in the same category in 100.
Yeah, what happens is that the budget is organized by department, and we're putting the cost in the department according to the manager who manages it. So insurance is managed in Department 160, administration, so it's put there for budget purposes. That's a major assumption, I guess, that's underlying this, is that we're not doing cost redistributions in the actuals. It's just what will hit the system, and we're trying to match the budget to that system. Now, when somebody wants me to say, well, what's the cost of Route 1, then I would need to do a redistribution to try and allocate insurance and all the other costs to a specific route or something like that. But here, it doesn't do that. This is organized by department so that each department manager can really understand and focus on what they have to watch, to approve, think about.
Yeah. And do you do an accurate analysis of the cost per passenger mile for each route?
I have looked at that already a number of times, especially when we want to do costing for like 411, 412. Is I'll go through that exercise and figure out what the costs are, based on assumptions, of course, divvied up to each of the routes.
So which department, and that was one of the questions, with the 411, where do they fall? Who are they budgeted to?
Well, 411 takes a piece of everyone's cost, really. It depends if we're talking direct or indirect. Direct costs would funnel mostly from operations, like 100. You'd also see some from 190, our vehicle maintenance. And then you start talking about indirect costs. It's coming from 160, our administration, or even transit parks. They get a little piece of whatever costs are funneling through because of electricity.
So for the just for my thought process, you've got the 411 that runs from Stanwood to Mount Vernon, and from March's Point all the way down to the south end of the island, in reality, right? Or to Harbor Station. Okay, so do you, in order to distribute that grant fund, or to charge that grant fund, you figure like cost per passenger, or how do you justify the cost of the, I'm just curious how you figure out what to charge the state.
How to charge the state? Well, what I would do is I would look at every component of our expenses, and then I would try and allocate those components based on certain assumptions. So you might have operator hours, so I might want to see how many hours we're spending on that route. So I would allocate that, and then taxes would be a piece of, in addition to just the base wage. If you're looking at parts and supplies, I might want to know mileage, because I'm going to allocate it based on wear and tear on the vehicles. I also want to know the size of the vehicles and their gas mileage, so I know approximately how much fuel is being used on the routes. So within this income statement, you might say, looking at expenses, I would have to use different assumptions for the different types of expenses, because I think that would get for me personally, I just think it gets me closer to what the actual cost of that route is. And so the exercise for me was to, of course, start with my total costs and then allocate based on assumptions to the different routes on various factors, and then come up with the total cost. And that's what I would bill through to the state for that.
Well, the reason I was asking, I was just curious about your procedure. If it was me coming from the state saying, prove to me that you're using this money for that route, it sounds like you got a good handle on it, so.
It's pretty detailed.
Yeah, that's what I was just wondering how you did it, and I mean, I think that would pass.
Well,
And
the
inspectors.
state has to approve the formula too, so.
Right.
I mean, it's.
It's gotta be, I can understand it must be very difficult to do, especially because you got different
Very
numbers of people
difficult.
going to different.
And then we've got 411 operating out of Camino, which has a different set of considerations to look at, so.
Yeah,
It shouldn't be based on ridership though. The costs are the costs. So you just take the fixed costs and then the admin indirect costs and put it all together and say that's what this route is. It's
Yeah,
gonna
it's not
cost the
based on
same about
ridership.
if 1 person or 50 people ride it.
Yeah.
The cost's the same.
Yeah, the tricky thing is if you add a route, your costs suddenly shift. If you change the route, the costs will shift. Because, for example, your operator hours for 412, if I cut that in half, then my operators, the percentage going to that route would decrease. So whenever you make changes, then everything slightly shifts. And, yeah.
So does this budget, it doesn't include 412 yet? Okay. But it does include 411. What, did you have to make assumptions about how many trips, or continuing the current schedule?
It's continuing the current schedule. We have 13 runs on Whidbey and 9 runs on Camino.
Okay.
411.
and does the $1.15 million we get for that per year pretty much cover that cost?
It does. The money that we're getting covers, should cover our costs. And it's shown separately on that schedule too. You can see in the operating revenues, 411 is spelled out separately. Of course, the individual routes are not spelled out separately.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear that the 411 is fully funded by that grant allocation. It's an allocation.
That's the document here.
And then, if I may, I had just one more question. It's got to do with the wages. And I was wondering, since, like, if you look up on Camino, we're showing an 11.5% increase for Camino.
Camino?
But if you come back to paratransit, it's only showing a 1% increase.
Some of it's hours. He was explaining that it was hours.
Okay, is that what it is?
If you add more operating hours, you're gonna have greater costs in the wages line.
Okay, because I was looking at that was like, we anticipated increase in wages with the status quo.
There is one scheduled increase. We added a position in Camino in this
Okay,
budget.
and
So
what
that-
did you budget in as far as actual employee wage increase?
No,
Or anything, did we budget?
we're not doing that.
Okay, we didn't do that. Okay.
No, we're not doing that.
Not that, doing that. Okay.
Was that
No, I can't answer the question though. I
What?
can't answer the question regarding the extra individual. The one added individual on Camino is an additional dispatcher, which was originally cut in the budget reductions in 2014. That's a dispatcher position. We only have currently one dispatcher. We need 2 dispatchers to cover the entire span of service on
I'm
Camino.
quite certain that Dino will be quite pleased about that.
Right.
Yeah.
But Dina also drives a
Yeah.
paratransit route.
I talked to a lot of folks over there that said that they really needed another dispatcher, that they had used to have one.
Right, so that one is budgeted in here.
Very good.
Is there also, did you mention full-time, a half-time addition in administration?
Yeah, I didn't mention that. Our receptionist, we budgeted a full-time position. It's currently half-time. We also budgeted a shift from a position we had in operations for
Planning and communications.
Planning and communications would now shift and become a supervisor in the PM shift. So we're taking that position and kind of changing it. Where we
Taking
have
the money for that
the
position.
money for that position and changing it to, in the same department to a greater need.
What's the cost from going part-time to full-time in terms of benefits? What's the benefit cost?
Benefits, of course, is a number of items, but we have our 457 plan, which is a match, but it's generated by what the employee contributes, and then we match it. But in terms of medical and dental,
Yeah.
it also is dependent on what they choose. For example, just an individual plan or family or
Did you
whatever.
budget at the highest assumption level?
I'd have to look, but yeah, I'd have to look. Probably not at the very highest level.
So, and I realize the insensitivity of what I'm about to say, but welcome to the new world of life with medical costs. Did we look at 2 part-time employees to cover the front? I mean, I need to know what the cost is for adding those additional hours versus adding 2 employees, because then they can cover one another's shifts if someone's on vacation. And I realize that it is insensitive, but you know, it may not be the most cost-effective or strategic way to go about it in terms of coverage. So I think that we need to know what those medical costs are. Also, I would encourage us to budget at the highest level of medical, so we don't have to go back and if they took a lower level, we'll pick up cost savings. If we budgeted lower and someone picked higher, and we're budgeting for the position, not the specific person who may fill the job.
What I did in order to develop this budget is I went and looked at each individual separately and tried to budget the level at which they were currently enrolled. They could change that enrollment.
Sure.
So on average, hopefully it's going to be close, but it's not going to be exact. And then for employees that we haven't yet hired, that we might need to hire in terms of rollover, I think I probably budgeted at like an average or lower level. So I didn't budget at the very highest level on this.
So this is what we'll see in that supplemental budget, is all of these changes and the costs associated with those recommended changes that are in this budget.
Supplemental budget would be what?
Well, it's,
You mean the budget revision?
no, I mean, what we'd asked for was to see all of the new requests that are built into this budget. So things that, if we were to do an ongoing budget, it would cost one thing. Then there are additional requests or supplemental requests that everybody has. Positions they want changed, hours added, equipment purchase, all of the new things that take it from being a status quo budget to the budget we have now. I want to make sure that we're seeing all of those new items and the costs associated with them.
So you want a separate schedule of any large changes or
Anything that's in addition to what's already the 2015 budget.
Yeah.
So it's easier to break out.
Well, I mean, I think there's, and I'm not trying to be micromanaging, but it is in my nature, as we know. But I do think it's important to understand where we're making those investments. I mean, this board has said we want to build up that reserve fund. Every one of these decisions competes with that reserve fund. So I think we need to know what those are and own the policy choices that relate to either those expenditures or saying no and then that savings. And so I think that's important for us to do.
okay.
Yeah, for example, like in the county, we have each department head, each elected change to us. And, you know, our budget, we want the same as last year. But we would also like to add this year somebody at, you know, a .8 FTE to do this job. So we know that it's the same as you had last year plus 1%. And it's new ad. Or we want this project, you know, we need new software. You know, like Central Services came to us and says, well, you know, we need to go into phase 2. That's going to go for our new website. That's going to be X amount of dollars. And we know that that's what they're asking for, that supplemental.
Okay.
I have a question for you on 11.1, just a consistency issue, again on vehicle maintenance, sick leave buyout, vacation buyout. You have for 2016 was $6,000 in there. You obviously didn't do an increase percentage-wise.
Yeah, just because the percentage would be over zero, it just wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Wherever you have a column, either in column 3 or 4 that is empty, you won't see that percentage increase.
Now, I'm gonna jump forward quite a bit, and this is a kind of a philosophical question. Actually, it's not a philosophical question. If the board said we have $3 million that we have to have in a stabilization fund, $3 million, and we said we want to have that funded in 3 years, how would you be able to adjust this budget and say, this is a mandate that you have to follow? You went back and looked at everything through this thing, how would you come up with $500,000? That's the way the math works, I think it does.
$3 million.
That was Jill math.
That was it.
Well, you know, I think
The $500,000 was a hypothetical.
I've already heard the answer. It was, you know, it's a matter of trade-offs and priorities. You'd probably need to change our philosophy of saving for capital. So we'd be saving for that reserve. So that would probably be the
If you went through the whole system, line item by line item, you had to come up with, and I'm using a hypothetical, you had to come up with $500,000 to go into that fund.
Yeah. Well, I think we're talking about just reducing expenses. You know, where are we going to do that? We're going to reduce capital expenses. Would we reduce operating? And then we have the transfers. That would be the first area I would probably target, would be my transfers away from capital reserves to operating restricted reserves. But I wouldn't suggest doing that necessarily because, you know, we're looking to the future with these reserves and purchasing things that we expect to wear out. So, but you know, that would probably be my first place to go.
But we have to get there.
Well, I would say capital reserves aren't a place where you can make a cut. That's not, I don't think that's an option because we have to buy capital. We have to replace buses. This is not something this brick and mortar that's going to last forever. They have an expiration date. Personally, I think we need to look at something with the buses and, well, personally, I think the service vehicles, I think we need to look at those hard and heavy. But the vans, we're already charging X amount per mile, so many cents per mile, and that's where that reserves money is coming from. I think we need to do the same sort of thing with the buses, that X amount of our budget per mile, per bus goes into that reserve. That's how you build your reserve for that capital reserve. So that's not touchable. But what can you cut, such as, do we really need route match software? Do we really need these communications? Do we really need, I mean, we've got $100,000 in licensing fees. We've got another, I think it was $50,000 for new route match software. We've got iPads, we've got cell phones, and we've got new radios. Do we really need all those? Those are all high-ticket items. Can we cut something there and say, all right, that's going to go into our general operating reserve, our savings account?
I think
That's what you were saying with capital. You would cut from the capital side.
probably, but you
That's
know,
those expenses.
Well, when I talk capital, I'm talking about bus company, I'm talking buses. To me, that's capital,
Yeah.
buses and buildings.
so I think
It's capital. Anything that's stuff is capital, right?
Well, we got $100,000 this year for small tools.
the only thing I would consider in that discussion is if you're cutting route match, if we purchase route match, I mean, that's not a foregone conclusion, but the benefit you would lose would be perhaps smartphone access and ability for customers to see where those buses are. So that could improve ridership, you know, and the cost side of that, the real cost to us is maybe $35,000, $40,000 for that capability for customers to easily ride our system. The more
What's that do for the customer? They look on their smartphone and it tells them where the bus is?
well, that's one of the benefits,
I
is
had no
that
idea.
they can see the location of the
I was gonna
vehicle.
say, we got a schedule.
It's a new world, folks. People use
Well,
their phones for things.
For
There's a whole
$40,000 a
generation
year,
of
they
people.
can do, you know what, look down the road, when they see the little white bus coming towards them, it's here.
I get the schedule online, I put it up on my phone right here. We go by.
Anyway.
Here's a new one.
Yeah, we've been at
This
this
is
too
not
long.
Island Transit Uber.
I do think that we need to have, so I want to talk about fares for a moment. The assumption's not in here, but we are talking about trying to build revenue, and that would be a revenue source. So before we, and I'm glad Ryan's here because he can hear some of my questions. Huh?
You getting this?
Some,
Yeah.
Okay.
We were talking about how we don't do regional allocation of costs, that we just do kind of an overall cost for the system in terms of our different runs and different things, but you could do that. If you were asked, you could figure out what each run costs.
Approximate it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one thing we need to do sooner rather than later is to start understanding what it's going to cost us to charge fares. I think we need to queue up these community meetings before we adopt this budget, because at some point we're going to have to either build the fare assumption in or not have it. So we have this timeline of budget adoption. I think we need to think strategically about our decision making around fares. In order to do that, we need to know the cost. And I bring this up because, and I wrote down, are we interested in that before I say it, because it was a question to the board, is, you know, we're talking about a flat fee for the connector routes and then an internal fee all being the same. I don't know that that necessarily should be our approach. I mean, certainly it costs more money to run on Camino Island. I don't know why they would pay the same route, same dollar amount that somebody who takes a Whitby run would pay. I appreciate the political dynamics of that, but I think it's something we need to consider, that maybe those buses, to get that level of service, cost more. They're certainly not paying their prepay rate the same because they don't have a sales tax base over there, and this is a sales tax driven model. So I think we need to start looking at some costs around what that's going to cost us, and then how much revenue we're actually going to pick up. If we pick up revenue, we can make a determination as a board that that revenue from fares is what goes into our restricted reserve, perhaps. But I don't know that there's going to be any profit because we haven't decided that. And if we're going to move ahead with fares and it comes at a higher cost than collecting, that needs to be in our budget assumptions as well. And so I would encourage us to queue up that conversation soon, because there's either going to be a positive or a negative budget impact to the decision.
I like that comment, Jill, in that putting this, the public forum out there for the fair discussion has to go out there, it has to be part of this. My thought, Jim, and for this board is, and I know this sounds arbitrary, we say we have to set a timeline when we're going to have this stabilization fund. We're not going to get there without setting a timeline. Whether we say it's going to be 6 years, $500,000 a year, which I think is realistic when you consider fares and cuts in here. This board could tell the staff, we want $500,000 set aside in this stabilization fund for a period of 6 years, because we're not going to have a sustainable, well-financed and financially structured organization until we have that baseline in here. That is one of our highest priorities, is to have that foundation financially, and still we have to maintain service, but we have to balance that service with what we can afford and what the public is willing to pay for it.
Going back to fares and the fares money being used for it, and going back to public conversation, I'd be more than happy to start this public conversation on Camino. And I will tell you, the easiest place to implement the fares is going to be on the 411W and the 411C, and you stick the boxes that were given to us for free in the doggone buses, and you tell people it's going to be $1 a ride or $2 a ride, whatever it is. But I'm going to tell you, I will hold meetings on Camino, and the people on Camino will say, bring on the boxes, because they've been telling me that for a year straight.
And I hear that from other areas, just generally
And that'd be
scattered
the
around.
easiest place to begin it. Maybe we can generate enough money off of just doing those interconnector routes that we don't need to do the little in-town routes.
Maybe, but I also think that you're gonna create a public perception of people who ride those connector routes, that they're paying, nobody else is paying, and then when the state funding goes away for those routes, they're gonna say, well, why did my route get cut? I'm the only one paying for it. So I think that there's gonna be some community conversations that need to be had if we're gonna take the connector route money and put it in our reserve, which I don't think is a bad idea. I mean, I don't have a formulated opinion yet, but I think that it's not just as easy to say, well, this is what we're gonna do. Because the reality is when that route gets cut, which someday it might, people are gonna say, I've been paying for this the whole time, and why isn't what I'm paying sustaining it? And that was my frustration when we talked about fares, is that we're not gonna charge a rate that's gonna sustain it.
You can't possibly charge a rate
Right.
that's going to make money. You're gonna charge a rate that's gonna offset expenses.
But not enough to continue the route. And so
No.
that's my concern about, that's one of my concerns about just doing the fares on those connector routes. It's an easy place to start, but you're gonna create an expectation among that community of users
This is
that
true.
they are paying for their service unlike anyone else, and then when that service gets cut, they're gonna be the most frustrated because they've paid to subsidize another part of the system that they're not necessarily utilizing.
I think you're right, Jill, in that all of the systems have to have some contribution in cash in addition to the sales tax that some people say they paid for. And it goes even beyond the accounting side of that, looking at the political side of it. Our legislative representatives have made very clear that the legislature is looking at Island Transit in terms of whether they're going to charge fares or now, if we're going to be able to continue with getting grants, because I think our grants are dependent on what we do to help ourselves. I see a head nod over here from
Yeah, well,
the audience.
the state,
It's been clearly articulated to me.
the state has cleared, well, it's very clear that the state has recognized the importance of the inter-county connectors and the value they bring to the region as a whole.
Right.
Because they do a lot, other than the actual moving people, they're doing a lot to help the entire region. So the state has recognized that. That is why they allocated the money for this 2 years. However, that being said, I agree 100%. We've been sent a message, a clear, across the bow shot that says you're going to do something to help yourself if you want to continue to get this. I believe that in the next biennium budget, it will be easier to get continued funding if we have a fare. And if we're going to implement fares, I don't think to sit back and wait till we can afford to do it system-wide makes sense. I think we start off where it is easiest, which would be a 411 route. That 412 right now, I don't give a hoot about, because by the time we even get things done and set up for that, it would be, but I'm looking at the 411, we could set up a fare system with those.
We don't need
Start
to
off
have
with
a fare system for 11. We have to have a fare system for 412. So the
I know.
catalyst for the fare system is for 12. I also think our representatives, if we can figure out what it's going to cost us to collect the fares, if we're losing money collecting fares because apparently economics don't work in this environment, if we're losing money to collect those fares, I do not think that those legislators are going to turn around and say you have to lose money in order for us to give you money. That doesn't make any sense. So we have to go through the public process. And we have to get the details and the budget information. And I'm getting a little nervous that we are getting out there on our promise before we have any facts. So can we I just want to get some facts
Okay,
and have some public meetings and then get that information then so we can have it in time for our budget. That's all that I was trying to say.
Okay, and I just want to clarify something real quick. We've got, and Ken can help me with this. everybody that thinks that you lose money collecting fares, that is a misconception. As a matter of fact, when they sit back and say, oh, we've got a 7% recovery rate, they think that we're getting 7 cents out of every dollar. That is not the case. If they say, we're going to use round numbers. Let's say a route costs $1 million a year to run. If you've got a 10% recovery rate, that means the fares you collect are going to pay $100,000 of that route. You're not losing money, you're making $100,000 that's going towards it.
I hear you. All I'm referring to is we sat in a meeting with people who run transit agencies statewide, and a variety of them expressed some concerns about the ability to make fares on rural routes profitable, because the cost of collection and the infrastructure that you have to put in place might exceed the ridership and the amount of money you charge. So I hear what you're saying, which is it's just like we're going to pick up $100,000, but what we haven't done is the analysis of what it's going to cost us to pick that $100,000 up. If it costs us $101,000, it's not a good business decision.
Right.
We have to see those numbers in order to make good decisions as a board, and we have to have a community conversation in order to ensure that what we are assuming, which I am also assuming, because again, I haven't heard anybody on the north end of the island express concerns about fares. I mean, it was just in the Whidbey News-Times. Everybody was like, great, charge me. I think that the community, other than maybe there's some concern on the south end, might be amenable to that. But there's a public process, right, because we involve our stakeholders in these decisions. They're not for us to get up here, start guessing and making decisions. That's how we got here in the first place. We got to make some fact-based decisions. Okay. We need the numbers, and we have to talk to the community, and that's the process first. And I think we need to do it before we adopt the budget, so that we can get the information in it. That's all I was trying to say. Cue up the conversation.
Okay, so let's get that scheduled up that way. Ken?
Okay.
Now that's pretty clear. And I also heard when we had the people from the other transit districts in here helping us with this discussion, and I think Grace Harbor was one of them. They're talking about 8% recovery beyond the cost of collection. In other words, to use your example, if it's $100,000 to run the system, they were able to maintain,
They net 10,000.
They net 10,000 out of that.
Right.
And the other 90% is the cost of collection. It's not
the cost of operation, not of collection.
No, they said it was the
Oh
cost.
God, let's not go into this. We've been here 4 hours already.
Yeah.
Well, we have to get this conversation
Well,
right.
we need to have the, I know the public, but you're having a misconception about what the recovery rate is, because now Jim's going to talk about that it's going to take 2 seconds more per passenger, and it's going to do this and do that. That's all a bunch of boo-ha. The point of it is, if you come down and if you've got a 10% recovery rate and it's a $10 million a year operation, you're going to net $1 million out of collecting fares.
Okay.
That's what it comes down to. What we need to do is set the meetings with the public and say, we as a board, what we need is numbers. Okay, we need to know how many people ride the 411 daily.
Real numbers.
Real numbers. What does it cost to run the 411 daily? Real numbers.
I think Paul already did this, and we had it in the previous budget.
And we took it out.
And we took it out
Because
we hadn't made a policy decision.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the revenue and the costs are basically already figured out for the 411. Is that correct?
Majority of it. Definitely the revenue side, I worked on and put that into the budget. And then I added the cost of 412, but did not include the cost of any additional, I guess it would be collections. So I'll have to figure that out, just where we might need to hire like an ARP car or something like that. But
how many runs for 412?
412, I think I was estimating 4 runs.
2 in the morning, 2 in the evening.
Okay, we're going to move this along.
Mr. Chairman, if I could get clarification on public outreach process and revenues, 411, 412. I need to mention that there is an upcoming fair peer review meeting on Wednesday of this week. Ryan is here to answer any questions, but at that time they are going to well, you can speak for what you plan to do that meeting, but that process is continuing on. There will be recommendations coming from that group. I don't know that.
Identify that group.
So, what, may I speak?
Yes.
What we'll do is on Wednesday, we're going to bring back reconvene the stakeholders that were here earlier from the different transits, including one more from Wenatchee and Lake Transit, and answer some specific questions that Jill asked, not just Jill, but everybody ask, so we can, in terms of exact what you're asking for, exact facts. Ridership, what the revenue will be, some fares. I have a list of what those questions will be that we're going to go over. And then I'm going to ask the group to go back and do research on those. And so then we can come back to, my plan was then come back to you and present those results to you, so you can have that information to make your decision.
And do you recommend that we have the factual financial information prior to the community outreach meetings?
Absolutely, absolutely, because I think the community is going to ask a question, so what does this mean, where are you getting this from, and you're going to want to have that. So yeah.
So it may not work for timing with this budget adoption. We may need to just make that decision separately.
Yeah, I'd be happy to work with you and,
yeah,
get some of that information.
And part of the reason we're having it here is so we'll have staff available for assistance in that.
Now that's Wednesday they're coming in?
That's,
okay.
It's going to be a telephone call.
Okay.
But I will be here.
Okay. Then Ken, excuse me, Rick, I'm planning to be here. Jim, did you tell me Jim was going to be here?
I'm available. I'm interested.
But then we have to advertise for a special meeting then if we're going to have more than...
maybe it will only be the two of us.
Well, don't the rest of you want to be involved in that?
I am meetings.
Workshop.
Yeah, I can't be
All right, so
It's just two of us.
there's two of us. That settles that then. Can you email your questions into Ken with respect to this topic?
Well, I think we already have them. We have a two-page list.
I have them, but I'd be happy to send them out to anybody who asks.
The fundamental question is, how much is it going to cost us
Exactly.
to collect the money, and what portion of that you collect you actually retain?
Yes.
Is it a positive number or a negative number?
What we need to know.
Okay.
The other question I think that was asked was, what are they going to be the impacts on special needs populations? What would a possible fare structure look like in that respect as well?
Okay. Fair enough.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to also mention that I'm anticipating that probably, well, I think it's safe to say probably first quarter of 2016, we are going to have information for the board to act on relative to possible fares and also the 412 service. And any impacts from those two services would entail a budget amendment. So we would bring a budget amendment to the board, including all those additional expenses or revenues.
So maybe we can go ahead with the budget that we have in front of us.
Right.
And keep the train rolling.
Yes.
Well, and keep a fairly tight schedule.
Okay. Any other comments that we need to go over from any of the board?
I think that's fine, but I want to point out that what started this conversation for me was your previous question to Paul, which was what would you cut if you had to find $500,000? And so what we have to know in that answer is how much revenue we would collect from fairs to determine how much we would need to cut or add in, and so that was why I thought it was important to have this decision, is if our goal is to carve out $500,000 for a restricted reserve set aside,